Hello, and welcome to the Oak Spring podcast, where we celebrate the legacy of Mrs. Bunny Mellon through the work of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation. I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Season 2, Episode 10. And welcome to the podcast. On this month's episode, we're going to be celebrating Bunny Mellon's Oak Spring Garden Library, which comprises a collection of over 19,000 objects, including rare books, manuscripts, and works of art dating back to the 14th century. The collection mainly encompasses works relating to horticulture, landscape design, botany, natural history, and voyages of exploration. And there are also components relating to architecture, decorative arts, and classical literature. Bunny Mellon's collecting, guided by precise objectives and unerring taste, led to the acquisition of some of the most specific works in the history of botany, botanical illustration, and garden and landscape design, not only the most beautiful, but also those of the greatest historical and cultural importance, at a time when the field was still only of tangential interest to botanists, historians, and art historians. Joining me now on the podcast, and it's a great pleasure because we haven't had them on the show before, are two valued members of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation staff, and that is Carter Hulinsky, who's the Metadata Librarian and Special Collections Cataloguer. And alongside him is Tony Willis, the Head Librarian, who I think is probably one of the longest service members, Tony, aren't you, at Oak Spring?
One, but there's a few that have been here longer than myself.
Well, thank you both for taking time to come on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Well, let's start with you, Tony, if I may, and get a little bit of background, because you're kind of behind the scenes guy for most of the time. And I know those people that have been fortunate enough to attend and visit the library will have met you. So why don't you give a little bit of background for those who are not familiar with who you are and what you do there?
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in the area. My family lived in Rectortown, which is just 4 miles south of here. Both mom and dad worked for the Mellons and on the estate. And in 1979, I graduated from Fauquier High School and went to community college in Annandale, and was taking some art history courses and some humanity courses. And also worked part-time here on the estate. Mrs. Mellon started building the library in 1976, and she hired a librarian named Dita Amory, who was working full-time and keeping track of the collection from the brick house. And she also had an assistant named Daphne Statinius, who was a local girl. And, well, Daphne decided to get married and not come back to work. And so they needed a helper and someone to help with the move in when the old wing was completed. And so they hired me in July of 1980. And I think they had thought about me staying in this position as a library assistant for about a year. And so here I am today. I managed to complete the task and help with the move in. And then over time, I became librarian after Paul Mellon's death in 1999. And so I really assisted Mrs. Mellon with acquiring a lot of the collection and keeping track of everything and just helping whatever she needed for various requests, etc. So I was just a keeper of things, as I guess you could say.
So you kind of learnt on the job then, Tony?
I did. And then I should also say that in the early 90s, Mr. and Mrs. Mellon sent me to Rare Book School, and I took I took 5 courses, which was a big help. And it helped me to have a better understanding of bibliography and cataloging, and especially cataloging with special collections and rare books.
Now, do the maths for us. How many years is that?
So about 45 years, I guess, altogether. I've been here at Oak Spring. But again, I grew up because my parents worked on the estate. So I grew up with the Mellon name. And, I've always had the association with this estate and now the foundation.
Well, lots more to come. And obviously, we'll drill a little bit deeper. But Carter, if I can come to you and get your background and how you arrived at Oak Spring.
I'm originally from Lincoln, Nebraska, and I grew up there and went to school at the University of Nebraska. Funny thing is, I started working in my high school library and never thought about it as a career. When I went to the university, I studied sociology. Ended up having a student worker position again in the university library. Never thought I would work in a library. I worked for a year in accounting after graduating and ended back up at another high school in Lincoln and was there for 5 years working in a library. And it was finally my supervisor there who said, "Carter, I think you would be a great librarian. You should go to graduate school." So I finally decided, I've been at this long enough. I think it's time. I want to work with historic materials. I went to graduate school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And while I was there as a student, I came to Oak Spring as a short course participant. My first course was in June of 2022. It was Paul Stamford's Great English Estates course. And that's where I met Tony Willis. And the story is that when I was so excited to meet Tony and so excited to be in the library, but I think I was a little silly, or my mind just, I didn't have a good filter. But I think first thing I said to Tony was, "You have my dream job." And I finished my master's and we stayed in touch. And as I was completing that, there was an opportunity to come to Oak Spring Garden Library and work as an apprentice and to help with a shelf check to make sure that all the books were in the right place, which indeed they are. And at the same time, a full-time position came on and I entered that. So that's how I got here. It was I've always enjoyed gardens. I helped my grandmother in her garden. And I've always had a passion for libraries, even if I didn't realize it. So this is just a match made in heaven for me to be here.
And he's been a great addition.
Well, thank you. And Tony's a great mentor, and I really appreciate him showing me the ropes. So it's been a great opportunity.
You're a self-confessed fanboy, then.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about the collection a little bit, if we can, Carter, and how it's used and accessed today.
Yeah. So the Oak Spring Garden Library, of course, starts with Mrs. Mellon first acquiring a rare book when she's 10 years old. It's Robert Ferber's Flower Garden Displayed. But obviously, the library has grown so much since then, and Tony can talk a little bit more of that growth. But we primarily serve our residents, those being and our fellows here at the foundation. So everyone ranging from traditional bibliographic scholars to artists who are inspired by the collection. So we work with all kinds of researchers with all kinds of different needs. And of course, the bulk of the collection relates to plants, botanical illustration, natural history, and a lot of it's very illustrative work. So some people come to do they have a very specific subject, and other people are looking for inspiration to create new works of art.
Yes, I hear a lot of the visiting artists who use it for that purpose and for research purposes, and to create new work, as you say. I wonder how many titles you have, how many published works that you have on record now.
Well, so the total number of items in the object hovers around 19,000, but it breaks down to about 2,000 rare books. And what we define that as is when books are first printed around 1450 to about 1900. And that's really the important, unique works in the collection that are published. And then we have about 200 or so bound manuscripts. So those are one-of-a-kind handwritten materials. A lot of those, again, are illustrated with watercolors. And then we have works on paper, paintings, decorative objects, and then we have about 10,000 modern books, those published after 1900, which support the study of the collection. Those are the auction catalogs. Those are, biographies on the creators of the works in our collection. So it all kind of adds up.
Tony, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Sure. I think what's important to note is that, before Mrs. Mellon married Paul Mellon in 1948, she came from an affluent family and she was exposed to a lot of art, and her father had a wonderful library. So she was used to unique objects, and she had acquired a fair amount. And when she came to the marriage. Now, after she married Paul Mellon in 1948, she certainly had the means to purchase some of the more significant and important books relating to horticulture and botany. And so she did so. And so the heyday of the buying really here was in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and mostly from European booksellers. And then the Mellons also had a large subscription to the Sotheby's and the Christie's auction houses. And we acquired a lot of important materials, from those sales. But over time, Mrs. Mellon built a collection of landscape design and of botanical studies that, sort of can easily compete with other important institutions here in the U.S. and in Europe. And today, through the residency programs and through scholarly requests, the collection is becoming more and more popular. And it has some of the most wonderful works, for example, like Audubon's double elephant folio editions. It has famous garden manuals, Hortus Intensis, but that's just to name a few. And the collection that, Mrs. Mellon collected was one that she used personally herself. She often referred to these books as her Bibles and her own education, and she learned from them. And it also inspired her in all her many endeavors that she did throughout her marriage. For example, like the Rose Garden and various other gardening endeavors for family and friends. And so this was a working collection. And come 1993, Mrs. Mellon realized that this was such a unique situation and that it would be an ideal setup for people to come and have access to the collection, especially if you're interested in plants and gardens. And so the Oak Spring Garden Foundation was formed, and it continues on today utilizing this collection that she built, and it has been very inspirational to the residents and to the scholars that come here and use it. They're quite surprised of, the setting that it's in. We can open up a wonderful rare book on wildflowers, and then you can go out into the neighboring fields around the library, and you can see some of these wildflowers. And so Mrs. Mellon felt that from that inspiration and having that natural setting, these natural resources, that this collection could inspire and be a great opportunity for people to come and do research.
How did she describe her ambitions and intentions for the library when she began to create it, Tony?
It was all very done in a very humble way. And so, when she was building the collection, so, there was criteria there was things in place that before she purchased something, and that was, how did it relate to her personal interest? How did it relate to the collection? And how was the overall quality of it? And so all of those things she took into consideration as she built and grew and acquired materials for this library.
And as she was collecting them, presumably they would be shipped. She may not necessarily see them or have hands-on.
Well, no, so for example, when, for book quotes, a lot of things would come here on approval, and Mrs. Mellon would go through them and then make the final say. But in terms of the auction catalogs, a lot of times we would check that against the catalog, and we would send it to her and say, you have this copy, you have this edition, or this particular book would be very important to the collection, and we would say, why? And that's how she sort of went about it. And it was just in a very free, very humble way. And again, she realized, though, she had the foresight to see that acquiring all of this material, well, at the end of the day, what are you going to do with it? It's not just a building filled with beautiful objects. It can be used for intellectual reasons, and especially for those interested in botany, natural history, and horticulture.
Did she try at least to start off with the first edition of some of the titles that she looked for?
Most definitely. And then she would acquire other editions or other issues thereafter, especially if it was really of interest to her. And I can give you an example. La Cantini's work on the potager garden, the instructions for growing fruit for Louis XIV. The first book was done in 1690. And so after that, Mrs. Mellon acquired other editions. And why? Because she was very interested in fruit production, and especially on how you maintain espaliers and cordons. And those gardens here at Oak Spring reflect all of that, all of those works that she had collected. And so she bought many editions. And then in the early 90s, when they had to refurbish the Potager du Roi, and she did so with the help of her friend Hubert de Givenchy, she looked at these editions and she, when it helped for her to sort of refurbish the garden. And she also was very interested in the fact that those gardeners were still using those same practices to maintain and prune the gardens at Versailles. So she felt those traditions needed to carry on, which were instilled in all of these volumes that were created by Jean de la Cantini.
How many different languages do you have in print?
So we have, the majority are English and French, but and Latin, but we have all languages, Dutch and German. So that's the bulk of it. But at the same time, Mrs. Mellon was very fluent in French, and she did know Latin, and she didn't have any problem reading these volumes. And there's also some Italian volumes as well,
and Chinese and Japanese as well.
Oh, right. That's true. And the Chinese and Japanese. And again, we should mention that under Sir Peter Crane, the Chinese or the Far East collection has been built up. And so we have some really wonderful volumes relating to Japan, and especially to the catalogs and the nursery catalogs that focus on the iris and the peony and other travel studies, excuse me.
Right. We should actually perhaps talk a little bit about the maintenance of these works, because some of them are quite fragile with age. Describe, maybe Carter, I could come to you and you could explain to our listeners what it involves to maintain a catalogue of this value.
Well, I think conservation is always a priority for us. And when we handle these materials, we are very careful with them, and we work with our researchers. We want to put the books and the materials in the hands of the researcher, because there's no other kind of experience than to be one-on-one with those materials. But obviously precautions are taken for that. And we very closely monitor everything, and the environment that we are in is very controlled. We encourage everyone to have to wash their hands before they handle the materials. We don't do gloves, which sometimes I think people are shocked by, but actually the reason we don't use gloves is because you lose that sensation to feel the pages when you turn them. And so, these materials are made out of very high quality materials. They've lasted a long time. So we are very careful with them. But as far as access to the collection, which I think you were also asking about, there's multiple ways to find out what kinds of materials we have. And of course, we have a traditional online catalog that we've been working on enhancing, adding subject terms. So that's if you have a specific author, say Ray Duté, you want to see what works we have by him, you can just put that in as a keyword search, and that'll create results. And this is all accessible through the osgf.org webpage. If you'll see a library tab, and you'll drop down to access the collection. But for those who might not have that specific term or that specific work in mind that they're looking for but need to browse, beginning in the 1990s and through the early 2000s, the Oak Spring Garden Library published 4 catalogs, which are very beautifully illustrated and very descriptive. It's not everything that we have in the collection, but it has a lot of the true treasures of the collection. And those are available online under the publications tab on the website. They're freely available. Of course, we have hard copies if anyone's happy to purchase those and have them for them to consult. So that's another way to just browse the collection. But then also, we've, in the last year, have put a lot of effort to making our items that are digitized, the most unique things like the manuscripts and the watercolors. We're sharing those now through Internet Archive, and they're there. And we have a page on the website. If you go to the library, again, the library tab, you scroll down to the bottom of that page, you can directly link and see all the items. There's about 240 now that are available for you to view at home. So multiple ways to engage with the collection. And of course, there's the traditional way, which is talk to a librarian, and we're happy to help you find things as well.
Tony, I want to come back to you about Mrs. Mellon's early interests, because I believe she was interested in specific plants and flowers that was the catalyst, really, for building her collection. Talk a little bit about that, will you? And what specific interests that she had, and now, of course, you have this marvelous collection which is built around it.
Right. So I think really wildflowers was something that she was very interested in. And again, as a little girl, where she was raised in Princeton, New Jersey, she observed wildflower meadows that were near her house at Albemarle in Princeton. And so she became very interested, and her first rare book, and I think Carter mentioned that, was Ferber's Flower Garden Displayed, which is an early garden catalog by James Ferber, who had a wonderful and lucrative nursery outside of London. And the catalog depicts various plants that were growing in his nursery in the 1730s. And so she bought the second edition, and so after that, she said it was like a fever. She had to have more. And then, of course, her grandfather gave her the important Chester Reed, The Wildflower Guide, that was published in the early 1920s. And so all of those things had a profound effect. But then as she became a more established gardener, she started cultivating, and she had a greenhouse when she was married to her first husband, living in Clark County. And so she was growing a lot of seeds that came from Sutton & Son from England. And some of the flowers that interested her the most at that time were the delphiniums, were poppies, and those two in particular she grew quite a bit. But, she, over the years, she's experimented with all sorts of plants. It was very hard for her to say that she had a favorite, and that she was interested in plants in general.
I'd like, if you would, Tony, to maybe highlight a couple of pieces from the collection that catch most people's eyes, the two favorites.
Well, again, that's kind of hard to do because there are many favorites, but here at Oak Spring, we have a wonderful collection by a German artist named George Decius Ehret, and he produced a wonderful manuscript, and it's a compilation of various flowers with insects, and it's 44 watercolor body colors or gouache drawings on vellum, and they are some of the most exquisite works you've ever seen, and they feature some of these plants that Mrs. Mellon adored, for example, the poppy. So that's one really highlight. In addition to that manuscript, we have also several drawings by Ehret, but other important publications that he attributed to, and one of them being True's Planta Selectae and Rarioris, which is quite beautifully engraved and hand-colored. And we also have a beautiful colored edition of Fortis Istentensis, which Mrs. Mellon loved, and she decided to keep it out at all times, and it would be opened on special occasions to certain flowers when we had company. And these flowers were just sort of would be a way of welcoming you to Oak Spring or to the library. But I think other than the flowers, we need to really mention her interest in fruit trees, and especially apples. And so she grew many varieties of apples. She had many rare books, but also we have important works by George Brookshaw that feature raspberries, currants, strawberries. So Mrs. Mellon, as she became more established in the 50s and the 60s, she became more interested in all sorts of plants. So it's kind of really hard to pinpoint down because she had such a strong interest in horticulture in general.
Who is responsible for the acquisition of new titles?
Well, I think we all are here. We don't buy as many rare books as we used to. And I think, as Carter mentioned about conservation, so now that we are a nonprofit where we have residents and we have the collection being used more often, the vital thing is now to maintain it and to keep everything in good physical shape. We've also had a wonderful exhibition schedule. So the library has lent to many museums several of its works. So cataloging, keeping the records updated, and conservation are sort of our key areas that we need to focus on, and especially moving forward into the future. We still buy things. They're mostly modern books, and they're mostly good reference books, but the collection is pretty well established, I think.
Carter, can you pick out a couple maybe of pieces from the collection that you get to talk about most?
Well, one of my favorite works is a manuscript that was also one of Mrs. Mellon's favorites, is a collection of flower drawings by a gentleman named Charles Germain de Saint-Aubin, who was embroidered to Louis XV. And there's about 70 or so beautifully, it's all on paper, of these just these most beautiful flowers, a selection of flowers, and they're sometimes done in the trompe-l'oeil style at the beginning of the book. It's a very personal work that this man used as a pattern book to inspire the designs that he would have done for court. And it's one of the things we always pull out when we have visitors to show some of Mrs. Mellon's favorites. Personally, if I may say, I think it's a very well-known work, but we have two editions of Mark Catesby's Natural History of the Carolinas, and a very important work to a British audience, because that's the first time that people in England really see the flora and fauna of North America depicted in the early 1730s. I mean, there had been works before, but they were much smaller scale. These are much very beautifully illustrated and they were done in color. And Mark Catesby himself taught himself how to engrave, which there's just a wonderful story there and a connection to Virginia, because he came over here and drew the flowers and the birds from life, and then went on to publish the work.
I want to come to the November 13th screening of a new documentary, Tony, about Sophie Granville called Fragments of Eden. And before the screening, I should point out the original works on paper artwork by Sophie from the Oak Spring collection will be on display. So could you talk a little bit about Sophie Granville and her relationship with Sophie, please?
Sure. So Mrs. Mellon, throughout her lifetime, she acquired about 50 drawings and some oil paintings by Sophie Granville. She met Sophie through her friend Hubert de Givenchy. Sophie worked for the fashion industry, and she was doing a lot of designs. But Hubert de Givenchy encouraged her to draw and paint more because he recognized her talent. And so one of the first pieces that Mrs. Mellon bought was of a large cabbage that she had in her Paris apartment for many years. But over the course of time, from the early 80s until about 1997, Mrs. Mellon was actively acquiring her works. And we have several hanging in the library today. And next month, we plan to have a little exhibition here at Oak Spring, along with a documentary that they're going to show on her.
I'm sorry, that's going to be on November 13th. Do you have a time for that, Tony? Do you know for the screening?
It's in the evening. It'll be posted on our website for sure.
As always, osgf.org is that website, so you can go there for any reference to any of the topics that Carter and Tony have been talking about today. I want to come back to you, Carter, about the cataloguing efforts in the library. Is there anything you want to add to further educate our audience on the work that you're doing there, cataloguing the library?
Well, I think it's really important that the catalog records that we currently have in the collection, all the materials that come in and have been acquired by, were extensively described very thoroughly. And we've just been in a process, having that been a private collection, the way that we catalog very heavily, but really was ultimately to serve her. And now that we are a collection that now serves a lot more scholars and researchers, we're becoming more public facing. And so we're trying to make that transition of taking those original kind of catalog files and making them available online. So we're undergoing a large project to enhance all the online catalog records of our rare books and manuscripts. So adding more subject headings to make this a collection that the works in the collection are more related to each other. So if you're going in and you're finding a work on Ray Duté and you're interested in roses, there's a subject heading that's going to allow for more browsability and discoverability of the collection. So it's very behind the scenes technical, but I think that users aren't even aware of how we're making this catalog much more better for them. So it's very exciting to share these things.
So you're adding further and further layers then to the metadata that you have. So there's so much more cross-referencing, I would imagine.
Absolutely, yes. And the computer allows that, whereas before with the traditional, we still have a physical card catalog, but there are only two entry points for author or title, and you had to know. But now we can add all this extra information. We can add additional, we can go to the provenance. We can add that as a search term. We can add who the engraver, who the printer was. So there's different ways that people can interact and discover in this collection. It's very exciting.
Tony, would you summarize, please, the accessibility to the library so people who are not familiar with this, how they gain access and use it for study research purposes?
Well, it's mostly by appointment basis, and all the residents who attend the residencies can come and use the collection. But we also honor scholarly requests from all over the world, and very rarely do we turn anybody away. Sometimes we're able to put people up here, and we try to make it as accessible as possible, as Carter just said, which is what Mrs. Mellon wanted. Her initial dream was that this collection be utilized in a way that will be beneficial and inspirational, and that is our common goal.
Can you summarize then, Tony, in the 45 years you've been at the library at Oak Spring, the impact that this collection has had already?
Yes, I think people, when they come here, they're absolutely amazed by not only the quality of the collection, but again, the setting where this library sits. And it's a great place for them to come. And it's tranquil, and they're able to use the collection. And a lot of times we take them down another rabbit hole, and now the joke is another bunny hole. We expose them to so many other things that the collection has, that people leave here with a sense of not only inspiration, but with the ability to complete their task when they go back home. And the botanical artists have created, we either acquire or they're gifted to us, but the botanical residencies, these artists are amazing. And we now have, in the last year and a half, Carter, about 20 drawings, is that I would say, that are absolutely sensational, unbelievable. So it is with these programs and with this collection that, we plan to move forward in a way that's going to make it accessible, but be beneficial to other people all in all areas of the globe.
Do you know of titles that you have in the library that cannot be found anywhere else?
We do have some very unique, there's a lot of unique materials here. But again, what's nice about that is a lot of the special collections, the manuscript materials have been digitized. So our goal is to have those more accessible down the road. And I think that's going to open up other doors of exploration for future scholars.
Carter, finally, can you summarize what you've learnt in the time you've been here at Oak Spring through the library?
Well, I think it's important to say this is a remarkable collection that I get to work with, and I feel very honored to be a part of it and to handle these materials and most importantly, to share them with others. What I love about this place being here is it's more to it than just the book. And I know Tony has already said it's the environment that we are in. This library extends outside into the garden and into the landscape, and they cannot be separated. And when I step foot onto this property and I look at the views from even the parking lot, which has this gorgeous view of the mountains, I can see where Mrs. Mellon had planted trees and how the trees are trimmed. I mean, there's a whole intention in the design of the place. And then I pick up one of 4 red books that were done by a landscape architect in the late 18th century, Humphrey Repton's one of his designs. And I can see this idea of the picturesque, and I can see how Mrs. Mellon was inspired by the collections in her library to then create in a space around the library. So to me, I think that's very special. And I don't think that happens anywhere else, not at least on the scale that it's being done here. And I think a lot of our residents and visitors are also very moved by that.
Tony, is there anything that you would like to add for our listeners to know about the library?
I think that really sums it up. I think for those people who are interested, I think they should apply to the residencies and come and experience it here. It's unbelievable, and people go away again with more than they realized that they were going to get.
Carter Hulinsky, Metadata Librarian and Special Collections Cataloger, and Tony Willis, Head Librarian here at Oak Spring. Thank you both so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can find the complete transcript of this episode by scrolling down the show notes below the podcast player. And remember, you can subscribe to the newsletter on our website at osgf.org or by emailing us directly to program@osgf.org. You can also find us on social media. We're on Instagram at Oak Spring Garden Foundation, on X at Oak_Spring, and on Facebook at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. You'll also find the podcast on YouTube along with many other videos from the Oak Spring Garden Collection. And remember to check the website, as Tony said, for more information about the screening of Fragments of Eden by Sophie Granville. That's on November the 13th in the evening here at Oak Spring. And finally, we're looking forward to wrapping up the year with some of our signature annual programs, including our Celebrate the Harvest dinner, which takes place on November 22nd, and Winter Bird Count on December 13th. Both these events and all our upcoming programs and courses, residences, etc. can be found on the website at osgf.org. My thanks again to our guests this month, Carter Hulinsky and Tony Willis. I'll be back next month when our guest will be Cliff Brown, our head of arboriculture, conservation and landscapes. He'll be here to discuss the trees at Oak Spring and the new arboretum. And we'll also be hearing from Thomas Rayner from Phyto Studios. So do join us then. In the meanwhile, do share this with anyone you think might enjoy the podcast. Until the next time, thank you for listening.